Alright, now we're going to be using the quadratic formula to solve equations, solve quadratic equations. Now you might say, oh my goodness, Mr. Bauer, you're going to do 6 of those? This is going to take you like 30 minutes. Well, it might, but probably not, because once you get used to the quadratic formula, it actually doesn't take as long as you think that it might. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with the first one. Let's get moving. So, first thing is that a quadratic formula, in order to use the quadratic formula, the equation must be a quadratic and it must be equal to 0. So we're going to start off by subtracting 12, which is now going to give us x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Now at this point, it could be any old quadratic equation. You could just factor it, but we're not factoring this time. We're learning how to use a quadratic formula. So we need to list the a, b, and c values. Remember that this is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Note that the a and b do not have an x in them. They are in front of the x. The a is in front of the x squared. And so a is the number in front of the x squared, which is 1. B is the number in front of the x, which is negative 4. And c is the number on the end, which is negative 12. And so at this point we can put this all into the quadratic formula. We're going to go x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that's it. So now we're going to plug the numbers in. We're not doing anything hard. We're just using the formula. Yes, you have to memorize the formula. But once you have that, then we just go negative 4. Now note that every single time I put in a variable, I put it in parentheses. It doesn't matter where it is. This is to make sure that I actually follow PEMDAS and I do the things that I'm supposed to. A was 1, C was negative 12, and then put it all over 2 times A. At this point we start simplifying. So that's negative 4, which is positive 4, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared, which is 16. Negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 12 is positive 48. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. We're now down to x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 48 is 64 over 2. So x equals 4 plus or minus 8 over 2. So we'll do one where it's 4 plus 8 over 2. So 4 plus 8 is 12. Divided by 2 is 6. And then 4 minus 8, which is negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2. So those are your two answers for x. Let's go on. Let's move on to the next one. So this one is already in standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So let's just go ahead and list our numbers. A in this case is 4. B in this case is negative 4. And then C in this case is negative 11. And so we'll go ahead and put that in. X equals, now I'm not going to write down the whole thing. I'm going to state it, but I'm not going to rewrite it because it's still over here on the left-hand side. So x equals negative, and then the b, which is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b, which is in parentheses, squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So I've replaced each of those numbers. Again, each time I put a number in for a variable, I put it in parentheses to make sure that I follow the correct PEMDAS steps. Negative 4 is 4, plus or minus the square root of. Negative 4 squared again is 16. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Negative 16 times negative 1 is positive 16. All over 2 times 4, which is 8. So x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 32 over 8. At this point I'm going to simplify 32. Now you can do this on your own. I'm going to do it the fastest way that I can so that this video isn't forever long. But 32, if I consider the square root of 32, let's do our thinking over here. Square root of 32 is the same thing as the square root of 16 times 2. If you need to do the tree, do the tree. We learned how to simplify roots in a previous lesson. I'm not going to take time to re-teach that now. Square root of 16 is 4. I can't take the square root of 2, so it's still there. So now we can go ahead and rewrite x equals 4 plus or minus, but instead of root 32, I'm going to replace it with the simplified root, which is 4 root 2 over 8. Now at this point, you cannot add the 4 and the 4 together because this right here is 4 times the square root of 2. PEMDAS says the multiplication must be done before the addition subtraction. Since we can't multiply, then you cannot add or subtract. So at this point, the last thing that we can do is reduce. You can think of this as fractions. If it helps you, rewrite it as x equals 4 over 8 plus or minus 4 root 2 over 8. You can divide the things that are outside the root. You may not divide the things that are inside the root. All right, so here we go. When we simplify this, it will be 1/2 plus or minus 4 over 8 would then give me 1 root 2 over 2. And this is acceptable. The other way that I've been writing it in class is I went straight from this point and we simplified it from there. We just divided everything by 4, so we had 1 plus or minus root 2 or 1 root 2 over 2. And those two things right here mean exactly the same thing. Alright, so I'm okay with either of those formats. Some people like splitting it up into the two fractions. Let's go on to number 3. Okay, so again, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Is it in the correct format? No, it's not. So let's get it in the correct format. Subtract the 17x. So we end up with 2x squared minus 17x plus 8 equals 0. Now we're ready for the quadratic formula. So let's define A. A is the 2. B is the negative 17. And C is the 8. Remember, we don't need any letters. It's the numbers in front of the letters that are important. So then we've got A, B, and C. Now let's go ahead and plug it into the quadratic formula, which is negative b. So negative, and b was negative 17, plus or minus the square root of b, which is negative 17, squared, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Alright, so negative 17 is positive 17, plus or minus the square root. Now 17 times 17, I don't know what that is off the top of my head, so we write it down. 7 times 7 is 49, carry the 4. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. And then the 17, 1 times 7 is 7, 1 times 1 is 1. So 9, 8, 2. So 289. And then I've got a negative 4 times 2, which is negative 8. Times 8 is negative 64. All over 4. So then I've got 17 plus or minus the square root of 200. And then 8 minus 6 is 2. 9 minus 4 is 5. All over 4. Now we look at 225, and you may say, well, I don't know how to take the square root of that. So let's factor it. I know 5 goes into it because it has a 5 at the end. So 5 goes into 24 times with the remaining 5, so 45. 45 is 9 times 5, and 9 is 3 times 3. And we find out that the square root of 225 is actually 15. So 17 plus or minus 15 over 4. And then we do 17 plus 15, which is 2032 divided by 4, which is 8. And we do 17 minus 15, which is 2 divided by 4, which is 1/2. And so those are the values for x. Let's go on. We got just a couple more. And go a little bit faster now because hopefully you've kind of figured out the basic idea behind it now. So here we go. Get it equal to 0. Subtract the 12. And so we've got x squared plus 3x minus 12 equals 0. Then we identify a, b, and c. A equals 1, B equals 3, C equals negative 12, and we go negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And then we can solve that because we say x equals negative 3 plus or minus 3 squared is 9. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times negative 2 is 8. So we've got 9 plus 8, which is 17, all over 2. I can't simplify the square root. Therefore, I will leave this just as it is. That's fine, just like that. Let's go on to number 5. We're going to add 13x to both sides. And so we've got 5x squared plus 13x plus 5 equals 0. We've got A is 5. We've got B is 13. We've got C is 5 again. And we're going to go ahead and put these into the quadratic formula. We've got x equals negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. We simplify it. X equals negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 13 squared is 169. We've got 4 times 5, which is 20, times 5 is 100, so minus 100. All over 2 times 5, which is 10. So I've got x equals negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 160 minus 100 is 69. Now let's see, 69, I know a 3 goes into that, but then I get 23. I can't simplify that, so I'm just going to leave it as it is, and I can't reduce anymore. So there is your answer. We're on to our last one. It's getting pretty quick now that we kind of got the basic idea, right? So let's go ahead. I'm going to add 3x squared to both sides. And I'm going to rearrange it so it's in standard form. So I'm going to have 3x squared, and then comes the minus 12x, and then comes the plus 12 at the end, all equal to 0. Now this time I'm going to cheat a little bit because I notice that these are all multiples of 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3. Now you can actually factor it out, or you can actually divide it because it's equal to 0. You can only do this when it's equal to 0. So maybe let's do that. Let's just divide everything by 3, which will leave us with x squared minus 4x plus 4, which is equal to 0. Now we can identify a as 1, b as negative 4, and c as positive 4. The nice thing about this is I now have smaller numbers to work with. So x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And so I'm just taking these numbers, plugging it into the quadratic formula, which we did in the first problem. So now we've got x equals positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared is 16. And then I've got a minus 4 times 4, so that would be 16 minus 16. And so that will give me 4 plus or minus 0 all over 2. So that would be x equals 2. Which, that makes sense. It's the answer. So there you go. We're all done.